Yeah. Appreciate the welcome this morning by my man Frankie. Contribution as well. Who knew that Junior could really shake it, right? Who knew that the man had the heart to really do it? I take my hat off to you, Junior. You're the man. But turn your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 11. Mo itatolo fia fa fonga lesona fa samo pe ona masanya italiwa na tato page no on YouTube. Fa malulu to le tu wina no tato le sona ya Apia amo le na fa pe ona tu wina mai eluso ya sama e fa pe ona tu wina se to e fono le Sikoti ona to love I put her mo tu ai ole le sona sa una mo le fia finei po le tayao tayao. But today, turn your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 11. We'll go to our next person of a man or woman of faith, right? Now, I don't know if you guys remember, but we're going through a little series on different characters of faith, right? And it's based on the fact that this year is supposed to be a year of mountain-moving faith. And so, in order for us to really know, how do we have such faith like these people or these heroes? In Hebrews chapter 11, let's go and look at, a few scriptures or stories about these very same people. But today, in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 20, we will have our next person. So last week, who did we talk about? Abraham. So this week, in verse 20, it says, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. It's quite funny looking at this passage. It doesn't say Isaac, he killed a lion, right? It doesn't say Isaac, he moved a mountain. But regardless of whatever you may do, the fact that you're on the Hall of Fame for faith means that you were someone very special to God. And I pray that, at some point in the future, we could all see our names in the Hall of Fame of faith, right? Imagine just seeing Jack's name on the, on the list, right? And then we see, Jack's first on the list. And then we realize, oh wait, that's upside down. No, I'm just joking. And then we see Sikotlani's name, right? They say, by faith, Sikotlani conquered and ... We'll continue that later. And then maybe we look on the other side and we see, by faith, Vene. I don't know. But we see here that all we had for Isaac was that he blessed Jacob and Esau. And it's interesting because I try to look for stories for this guy, Isaac, right? And I try to make different points about this guy, but I only could find one simple thing about him, which we're going to get to later. Regardless of the fact that there's not that many stories involving Isaac, we see that Isaac was someone that really learned his faith from his father. And so the title of our lesson today simply is Isaac Learning from the Faith of Others. Maybe Isaac heard stories about Noah, right? Maybe Isaac heard stories about Enoch. But we don't know what it is, but we'll look further at just looking at the different things that we describe Isaac to be. Growing up as a man and even at a very young age, I would say the person that I learned a lot from in life is my man Jake right there, right? Come on, Jakey. So my man Jakey right there sitting at the back. Love you, bro. But I remember when I was in year 3, right? In year 3 or in year 2, I can't remember. And my mom came rushing into the living room one time and she was super fired up and excited, right? And what had happened is she had just received a little letter saying that Jake had been awarded a scholarship to Newcastle, Australia. And she was all over the wall just rejoicing and getting pumped up. And, this is little me not really knowing, I've got to go to school because my parents tell me to, right? I've got to go to school because that's the only way I can eat a nice lunch, right? I mean, do you guys relate on that, right? You only eat a nice lunch when you're going to school, amen? But then I just saw the joy that it brought to my mom. And I was like, you know what? That's it. That's what I want in life. In life, I just want to do well at school so I can go to Australia, get a scholarship and make my mom fly it up as well, right? And so, you know, growing up, I was like, man, I want to go to Australia. I want to go on a scholarship. I want to be like my man Jake. And so I love you a lot, bro. You know, I give you a lot of credit, and I think part of my salvation I owe to you right there. So, but I basically learned from his example. You know, I learned from his life. And what we find with Isaac is even faith is something that we have to learn from others. Yeah. In Philippians chapter 3, verse 17, Paul talks about the same thing. In Philippians chapter 3, verse 17, Paul says, join together in following my example, brothers and sisters, and just as you have us as a model, keep your eyes on those who live as we do. You know, Paul is telling them that, man, we are to imitate him, right? He's like, you guys in the church, you guys have got to imitate me. You guys have got to follow or even learn your faith from your leaders. And I think one of the greatest people in history, or one of the greatest people even in the Bible, that really learned from men of faith, or better yet, great men of faith, is Isaac. You know, we don't really know a lot about Isaac. All we know that, okay, he was a son of Abraham. It was through him that the nation of Israel came. And he was a son of the promise. We also know that Isaac's name actually means laughed, right? And it was a name given to him by God because of his father's reaction to the promise that God had given him. In Genesis chapter 17, verse 15 and 19, we see that God also said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. Then God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. You see, your label or the meaning of your name does not define your destiny, right? Maybe you in a high school or maybe in your family, you're called to be the black sheep, right? A lot of us are smiling because we were those black sheeps, right? Maybe for some of us, we're called the immature in our family. You know, for me, I grew up being called, you know, I don't like saying this. I get so embarrassed, but the name that I was always called by my family was Ulukoi, right? So it's X-head. I don't know how, maybe you guys can see it, but I don't know how an accent relates to my head, but, you know, it's just something that everyone called me by, right? But man, I married an incredible, beautiful woman, so I'm no longer an accent anymore. See, your name does not define your destiny. Just because you're called accent doesn't mean you gotta marry an ex, right? But see, that's what we see with this guy, Abraham. And why? Because he simply learns from the faith of others. You know, he simply learns from the faith of even his father. You know, I've only got one simple point for us today, and that's simply faith to surrender. You know, this guy, Isaac, really had the faith to surrender. You look at all through his life, all through the stories about him, the number one thing that stands out to me about Isaac was he had the same surrender that Abraham also had. We'll look at a story to really highlight that. In Genesis chapter 22, turn your Bibles there. Come on. Genesis chapter 22.
Let's go, Scotty.
Verse 6 to 12. Genesis chapter 22, verse 6 to 12. We'll look at a snippet or a scene here about this guy, Isaac. It said, Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father. Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and wood are here, Isaac said. But where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. And normally you'd look at that and go, oh, well, it's only like 10, 12 weeks. You can just miss a few and then come back and be faithful, right? But Aaron was like, no. Even just missing midweek, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put God's kingdom first.
Yeah.
And a lot of us would be like, okay, maybe God's going to rescue this person. Sadly, he failed that course because he wanted to put God first in his kingdom. And then, he had to prolong it for another year because he had to do it the next year. Well, the next 6 months of the year, he got the call, hey, do you want to go to Hong Kong to help the church there? He ends up going to Hong Kong, and his family are like, man, you're crazy. What on earth are you doing? What the heck? Like, you're not even married. You don't even have a job. You haven't finished your degree. And you're almost an old man, right? Maybe your family's telling you that. I don't know. But his family was like, man, you're getting old. You're like 25 now. What's going on? He prolongs it the next 6 months. Hong Kong really changes his life. He comes back, finishes, passes, gets a degree. Within that next year, gets dating, gets married, and is now appointed an evangelist. Wow. And all of a sudden, his family look at him and go, oh, you're a man. That was quick. Right? It took you only a year, right? What happened, It's like, oh, you got a job now. Oh, wow. Oh, and you got a beautiful bride. Like, wow, she's amazing. But you see, he had to just prolong just to put God first and surrender to God's plan.
Come on.
And honestly, right now, his family don't even remember how long it took him. His family's just like, you know what, it doesn't matter. Even for me, my mom was like on my back about, like, hey, get your degree, get your job experience. Now she's just like, you're the greatest son ever, you've done it. She doesn't remember 6 months or a year. She just remembers that it's done, it's done. Wow. Maybe God is calling you to give up your selfishness. Maybe independence and self-reliance. Right? Maybe it's even pride. Like, what pride, what area are you prideful in that you're refusing to give up? Maybe just the thought of, man, this is who I am. I am going to be who I am. Right? Are you consumed in your own ways, your own thoughts? In Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12 to 15, it gives us a person who was consumed with his own pride as well. It's talking about Satan, and it says here, how you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly. On the utmost heights of Mount Sephon, I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will not listen to what my disciple says. I will not give my special contribution. I will not pray amen to you. No, I'm just kidding. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit. When we are prideful, all we're ever thinking about is I. Maybe you're here today and you're not a disciple and you're studying the Bible. Are you still thinking I? Or are you still thinking, man, I need to surrender? Maybe it's even a relationship, right, that God is calling you to give up. I'm really inspired. One of the sisters that recently got dating back in our church in Sydney, her name's Allison. Some of us know her. But this sister, one of her desires was, man, God, I want to date. I want to date in 2020. I want to date in 2021. And it's crazy. The opportunity came up for her to actually date. And this dude that she dates now was my roommate at one point. His name is Dune. He's one of the brothers in the church. And I still remember the story that the opportunity came up. The interest was mutual. And she was like, okay, I want to date. Okay, this is a great opportunity. I really want to date this guy. And then, lo and behold, she just remembers like, oh my goodness. I remember I made my vow to God that I will not date unless I become personally fruitful. And then she just holds it off and she goes, you know what? No, sorry. And the guys who were trying to advise her is like, no. I can't go against my vow with God. Like, I want to be personally fruitful. However long it takes me, however hard it takes, even if I lose the interest of this brother that I want to date, so be it. I just want to be personally fruitful. She was surrendered. She was like, you know what? Doesn't matter. The greatest thing I can have is a relationship with God. And so when she got surrendered, a few months later, she gets personally fruitful with one guy that is still faithful today. And at the same time, she was like, you know what? It's great. And found out later that the guy still liked her. It's like, okay, let's start dating. Another date. You see, are you surrendered even with your relationships? You know, a surrendered heart is a flexible heart.
Come on.
You may ask, why should my heart be flexible? You know, the heart is a muscle, right? I've been told that if you ask any physio there is, they would say 90% of the injuries that happen in sports is because people are not flexible. That means they haven't stretched much. Now, I was even talking to one of my friends in Sydney, Kira, who actually deals with NRL teams, like professional teams, and she's like a physio, like she's big time physio. And she would say, like, honestly, almost 99% of the injuries I see is that it would have been prevented if they had just stretched a little bit more. And the only thing, and she says, it's always the islanders. She always says, I always tell them, did you stretch? No. It's like, that's your problem. That's why you get injured. But in the same way with life, when our hearts are not flexible, we will seriously get hurt.
Yeah.
We will seriously get bitter, and we will seriously get damaged.
Come on.
Why? Because things change all the time. Timings change, your kids grow up, timetables change, your spouse changes, the other person changes, people change their minds. You know, even as we are as a family, people walk away from God.
Right.
And if your heart is not flexible, that can really hurt you straight in the heart. You know, I think Isaac had a flexible heart. You know, even when you look at the story, if you go back to Genesis, you know, Isaac didn't go to his dad, Dad, this is too last minute. Why didn't you tell me? We've been traveling for 3 days. You didn't even say anything. It's like, Dad, you should have told me. I would have, you know, prepared my heart for it. Right? Have you heard that before? It's like, let me just get my heart right. Right? Well, what does it mean to have a flexible heart? Well, a flexible heart is a heart that is willing to change according to the changes and circumstances. You know, honestly, how do we see that Isaac had a flexible heart? Well, Isaac could have been correct with how he felt. But instead, he decided to bend his heart to his father's will. Why? Because a proud heart is concerned with who is right, whereas a surrendered heart is concerned with what is right.
Wow.
All he needed to hear was, God will provide. He's like, okay, let's go.
Let's go, Scotty.
You know, it was adaptable. His heart was adaptable even to the point of death.
Right.
I mean, think about it. A 30-year-old or a young man looking at his dad raising up a knife. He was just like, you know, I don't know what's going on, but amen. I've got to adapt. You know, he was quick to listen, and willing to be wrong. You know, I want to ask you a question. Is your heart flexible today?
Come on.
Or is your heart only geared to one emotion? You know, maybe the emotion of self-pity, right? The emotion of insecurity, anger, frustration, and sadness. You know, does your heart struggle with patience? Or is your heart quick to talk? Or is it quick to listen and change? Now, we sort of ask ourselves, well, how do we have a flexible heart? Well, the first thing I think of, remove all entitlement. In order for us to really have a flexible heart, we've got to remove this feeling of wanting to feel or act as you want to. You know, in Jeremiah 17 verse 9, it says, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? You know, it's super encouraging. Does anyone know what today is?
Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day, right? Sunday. Amen. But it was super encouraging. You know, last night, Jess and Tala, Jenna and I, and even Doug and Monty, we got together and we had a nice Valentine's dinner, you know, as couples and so forth. And it was pretty cool just getting together. It was encouraging. Amen. Eric will get his time soon. But, you know, it was just so cool because, like, it's so sad when you look at it today, but Valentine's is those days where people just get even more sinful, right? Because love has been so warped and so corrupted by the world.
Absolutely.
And I think, to me, what was so special about last night, besides the chicken and the great things that the sisters did for us, I think the thing that really encouraged me the most was we were just sitting there, looking at each other and encouraging each other. And we got to, at the end of it, we were looking at our partners and saying, okay, these are the 3 things that I'm really grateful for my partner. You know, Jess went, Tala went, I went, and Jenna went, and we were all like, aww, you know. And it wasn't awkward at all. But it was just this, about this idea of just, man, I'm here to give. Because that's what love is. It's just about giving. There was no entitlement of going, wait, you got to give to me and how I feel. You know, which is mostly what the world is about. It's like, okay, well, you got to give me something. But we're just like, you know what? No, we're just going to encourage each other. And at the end of it, we felt encouraged ourselves. So thank you to the sisters that prepared it. You know, in order to have a flexible heart, you got to always seek to either understand or seek to learn. In Luke chapter 6, verse 40, it says, the student is not above the teacher, but everyone is fully trained will be like their teacher. You know, the question is, are you like your mentor today? Right? You know, I know that one of the things that we do the most is we love it when people give their hearts to us, but we don't really like giving our hearts to people, right?
Yeah.
Like we go, man, I really love this disciple or this younger brother or sister. They just really are loyal to me. And then we turn to the people that we're supposed to be loyal to and like, maybe not. Right? You know, I want to lift up my man Sikotlani, right? I mean, even Eric goes on about it, but the reason why Junior has grown the most is because he's always seeking to learn.
Yeah.
Now, I sometimes give him a hard time, and I was like, bro, this, and he's just like, okay, let me just write that down, But every single thing, sometimes even the commas I have in my sentences, he writes it down as well. So that's a man that's seeking to learn.
Come on.
You know, we see that, you know, a surrendered heart is always a heart that seeks and takes advice, even in personal life matters. If you turn your Bibles to Genesis chapter 24, we'll look at further examples of this guy, Isaac. We'll look at verse 20, Genesis chapter 24, verse 1 to 8. The Bible says, Abraham was now very old, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the senior servants in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven, the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I am living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac. The servant asked him, what if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country you come from? Make sure that you do not take my son back there, Abraham said. The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me on oath, saying, to your offspring I will give this land. He will send his angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son from there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there. You know, right here we see a story where, you know, Isaac's father, Abraham, he goes to his servant, hey, I want you to go and look for a wife for my son. Right? I mean, isn't it encouraging that, you know, someone goes and looks for a wife or a husband for you, right? I know that Barrick is always, you know, nudging me and going, man, you got to promote me, man. He's like, what's going on, right? Now I'm going to promote Barrick, right? If you guys don't like Barrick, you're just not spiritual enough. Let's just be honest, like, that is a beautiful, spiritual, hard-working woman right there. You're welcome. But yeah, Abraham, he goes to the servants, look, I don't want you to go to the Canaanites. Why? Because the Canaanites, they serve different gods. All I want you to do, I want you to go to my line of family, because they will serve the Lord God Almighty. Right? You know, sometimes we can go, oh, I can't date someone outside the church, right? Because the church says so. Right? Oh, I can't marry someone who's not a disciple, because the minister says so. No, even in the scriptures itself, it says that God does not want us to intermarry with those who are not disciples.
Come on.
You know, well, what are the benefits of a surrendered heart? Well, because Isaac was surrendered and took advice from his dad, actually, he did nothing. It says, if you read later on, the story goes that the servant goes, finds a wife for him, brings her back, and it says that what Isaac was doing was he was meditating, right? He wasn't working or doing anything, he was just meditating. And then simply he just walks in and he goes, thank you, servant. Okay, I'll take my wife. Marries her, he makes a family, takes her to the tent, loves her and everything. And that's just it. But you see, the benefits of a surrendered heart, you will never really know unless you decide to surrender today. You know, we don't really know why Isaac had such a surrendered heart. But we know that people often have surrendered hearts for certain reasons. Like, number one, they imitate. Some people, they have surrendered hearts because they just want to imitate other people who have surrendered hearts. You know, some people, life just simply hits them. You know, I appreciate my man Junior, right? But even it was so powerful on Wednesday, he shared the fact that, man, I thank God for the lows I went to. I hit the lowest of lows when I came here. And I know that through that low, I was able to find you guys. You know, maybe that's why people are surrendered. You know, another reason I think of is that people don't want to hurt other people. Right? We don't want to harden our hearts. We want to surrender our hearts. Why? Because when we harden our hearts, it hurts other people around. Yeah. And then lastly, we don't want to, you know, we want to be surrendered. Why? Because we don't want to hurt God. Because ultimately, it hurts God when we don't surrender. You know, at the end of it all, regardless of why or what way you come to a surrendered heart, the result is still the same. You know, through Isaac, the promise of many nations, the promise of God's people came true and was able to be fulfilled because of Isaac. If it wasn't for Isaac, the promise would have been lost. But it was because of his surrendered heart. What promise is God trying to give you today that is not happening because you're not surrendered to his calling? You know, in Luke chapter 20, we'll close it all off here. Verse 34 to 38. You know, we'll see the result of a surrendered heart that Isaac had. You know, in conclusion, Isaac learning from the faith of others. Point number one, he had the faith to surrender. In Luke chapter 20, it says, in verse 34 to 38, it says, the people of this age, this is what Jesus says, marry and are given into marriage. But those who are considered worthy of taking part of the age to come, and in the resurrection from the dead, will neither marry nor be given in marriage, or nor can they die. For they are like angels. They are God's children, since they are children of the resurrection. But in the account of the burning bush, even Moses showed that the dead rise. For he calls Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. For to him all are alive. Right here it says that God is a God of Isaac, meaning that Isaac is still alive today in heaven. You see, without a surrendered heart, you will never make it to heaven. You know, I always tell people, not having a surrendered heart is like fighting a tidal wave or fighting a rip in the sea. It's like all you got to do is that the sea will eventually lead you to land. You just got to be surrendered. But if you try swimming against it, fighting it, doing it with all your might, you will end up drowning. You know, and as a result, in so many ways, God was able to send a message throughout the whole world through Isaac that Jesus was going to come. Why? Because Isaac's life really painted the picture of what Jesus was going to be like. Number one, both were loved by the Father. Number two, they were both obedient to their fathers, even to the point of death. Number three, they offered themselves willingly, both Isaac and Jesus. You know, both carried wood up the hill of sacrifice. Jesus carrying his cross. You know, both were sacrificed actually on the same hill. And in the same way, when Abraham said that God will provide, God did provide 1,000 years later. You know, both were delivered from death on the third day, just as Isaac was. through Isaac came the picture of what the Messiah would be like, and which is the reason why we're here today, and then one day we'll make it to heaven. And that's our lesson. Bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. You know, oftentimes when we read this passage, we refer to what amazing trust that this guy Abraham for God. And that's rightly so. But even when we look further, what we see here is not only one man's trust, but also the other man's surrender. You know, right here we see that God has tested Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. Now we all know, not only in general because we grew up in church and so forth, but also from our study last week, that Abraham was willing, right? But even more willing, I believe, was this guy Isaac. Yeah. I mean, what we see here from this passage is that prior to them arriving at the hill or at the mountain, you know, where Isaac was going to be sacrificed, Abraham did not even tell Isaac what was going to happen. And so in verse 9, if you guys look at it, it says that he actually bound up Isaac. Now many of us, we look at this and we read it, and maybe we were at Sunday school, maybe like Barak, we thought that, you know, we know better, right? I know that, you know, Isaac was this little boy, and you know, Abraham was like, hey son, let's play a little game. Let me, you know, tie you around, right? Maybe that's what a lot of us, even the videos or the movies that we watch, we saw Isaac as this little boy, right? And, you know, maybe, you know, Abraham, we think, okay, son, here's a little game, right? Let's just wrap you around this little rope. You go sit on or lie down on the altar, just close your eyes, count to 10, right? And if you feel something sharp, just go, you win, daddy. I don't know, whatever it is. But maybe that's how we picture it. But in actual fact, you know, many Jewish commentators or writers believe that Isaac was in his 30s when this event was happening. So Isaac for sure wasn't a little boy. Now, we don't know exactly if that's 100% correct. We don't know exactly if Isaac was in his 30s, right? What we do know, however, if we look at the scriptures, we do know three things. You know, the word boy in verse 12 there, you know, when the angel says, hey, do not lay a hand on the boy. You know, it's translated from flexible Hebrew, which doesn't necessarily mean a young boy. It could mean a young boy, but it also could mean a young man. You know, but even today we do that, right? Like, for example, if you ask someone who's, hey, how old are you? And they go, 61. And they look at you and go, wait, how old are you? 25. Oh, you're a baby, right? Yeah. It's not the fact that you literally are a baby. In some ways you are in reference to the age, but he's just saying, or she's just saying, that you're young. You know, the second thing is that we see that Isaac knew that there had to be a lamb or an animal to be sacrificed. So that means he was old enough to actually remember and know how the burnt offering process goes. So that's why he was like, hey, I know that we're doing a burnt offering, but I don't see a lamb. I've never seen a burnt offering before done without a lamb. Right? And so he would have been older than being just a little boy. You know, thirdly, we see that Isaac was the one carrying the huge pile of wood up on the mountain. You know, when you have a burnt offering in the Bible, you'd have to have, you know, loads and loads of wood. Why? Because what you're trying to do here is you're trying to burn the whole sacrifice up. So Isaac would probably be lifting like a whole log or something like that. And so we see that, you know, not only it's a lot, but in essence, we know that he's not a little boy, so he may most likely would have been at least a young man. You know, in essence, what we do see here is that Isaac was old enough to know that he was being sacrificed, and also strong enough to resist his dad's so quote-unquote crazy plan and run off. And Isaac could have done that, but instead he surrendered himself. You know, what does it mean to surrender yourself? It means to stop resisting an opponent and submit to their authority. It could also mean to give up or hand over a person, a right, or even a possession. You see, Isaac chose to give up his rights, his life, and hand himself over to God. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8 to 9, turn back to Hebrews chapter 11,
Come on, Scotty.
verse 8 to 9.
Let's go, Scotty.
The Bible says, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. You know, Isaac simply had this mentality, you know what? Whether I live in tents or whether I'm a foreigner to a different country, I'm surrendered to God's will. You know, are you surrendered to God's will today for your life?
Come on.
You know, what possessions or rights is God calling you to give up today? You know, are you resisting God's call by not giving up your all? You know, are you not giving up your family, right? I know that's one thing that we find the hardest to do. You know, it's been great just, just getting to say goodbye to Lope. I know a lot of us are a bit sad and not seeing Lope here, and hopefully she's watching online. Even on Friday, my sister walked in and she just bawled out crying, right? And it was like, I remember just looking around where we were praying. I was like, man, I'm so used to seeing Lope and she's not here. But anyways, I'm so proud of Lope.
Yeah.
Because when we were getting ready to come here and start the mission team, start the church here, Lope was heavily persecuted by her family. It got to the point where the night before she had to catch a plane, her sisters and one of her brothers came in and they were banging on the door. They were like, come out. And then they stayed out there. They were like, you know what? Anyone that leaves the store is about to get a hiding. Right? And you have all these, some of them like Black Americans, some of them like these, Mexicans. They were like calling me and they're like, Scotty, Jenna, what do we do? What do we do? It's like, guys, calm down, you know. And then inside I was just freaking out myself. I was like, what do we do? What do we do? You know? It's like, calm down, you know. It was a scary moment, you know. We had to call people. People weren't answering the phone. We were like, man, I can't, this is gonna get bad if these Samoans step in that house. Ooh, it ain't gonna be pretty, you know. And so we were like, hey guys, call the police. And so they get the police come in, and the police were like, oh well, we can't do anything because it doesn't seem like they've been knocking on your door or causing any trouble. But they're just hanging around in front of your lawn, right? And that's what they were doing. Tricky Samoans, that's how they roll. And so they were just hanging around in the lawn, and they were like, well, we can't file a report because we don't have any evidence, right? And they were like, okay, but here's what we can do. We can tell them to leave, in the next 30 minutes. I'm like, mate, 30 minutes, they're going to be gone, you know? They're going to break down that door in 30 minutes. But all in all, it got so scary that Lope then had to escape through the back, hop in one of the disciples' cars, and then go and sleep at that sister's house, just so she can wait until the morning for a flight to get here. But even that, man, that family were hunting her down. I think her family actually showed up to the airport. But in the end, they were like, we still don't agree. We still don't like what you're doing. You've been so disobedient, but we can't stop you. And so Lope hops on the plane, comes here, stays for a year and a half. And I still remember the first thing that she said to me about why she endured giving up her family to come here to Samoa. She said, you know what, Scotty? I don't know what it is, but I feel like God is just telling me, if I don't go to Samoa, I will lose my salvation.
Wow.
And then we get here, she gets baptized and actually has salvation for the first and real time.
Wow.
But even in that wasn't only the victorious story. At the end of it, God really humbled her family to the point that, one person was doing badly, another child was rebelling in a wrong direction, and then they looked at Lope and they went, well, you know what? At least Lope is rebelling and doing something good. Lope, come back, we love you, let me pay for your flight, And now, prayerfully, she's in the States. But, see, she had to go through the understanding of, man, I've got to surrender to God and give up my family.
Come on.
You know, maybe for you it's a university degree. Maybe it's a situation where you've got to prolong your university degree just so you can put God's kingdom first. You know, I even think of one of the brothers in Sydney. His name's Aaron. In his final semester of uni, he was going through, he was a disciple by that time.